Hi everyone, my name's Declan McGlynn. Welcome to Friday Forum Live, Point Blank's weekly broadcast bringing you exclusive tutorials, artist interviews and industry insight every Friday live from East London. Today we're joined by Chris Carter to look at building synth drum sounds in Native Instruments Massive. So today is all about drum synth and sound design. But remember, you can learn a lot more about sound design on our online diploma courses. Make sure you check them out at pointblanklondon.com. And remember, we are completely live today. So get your questions in the chat room and we'll get to them throughout the broadcast. Chris, welcome back. Time for FFL again. So we're looking at building drum sounds from scratch in synthesis, specifically in Massive.
In Massive, but not only Massive, because what I thought we might do is look at some external processing that you could use after Massive. So a little bit of compression, a little bit of transient designer, maybe a bit of distortion, and then a limiter just at the end, because those are all things that could contribute to the kind of character of the sound. And I guess there's only any point doing this if you're, whilst you're in the process of doing this, you might as well get as close to the finished article as you can, rather than make something which is okay, but then spend loads of time EQing it and compressing it and so on.
So get it right at the source instead of
get it right at the source,
later,
but just, you know, come up with things that have a little bit more character as well. And obviously, if you make the patches yourself and you save the patches, you can always revisit them, go back to them, and maybe you just wanted to play around with the decay or the distortion or the brightness, and you've always got that option as well.
So what's the benefit of making a sound from scratch in a synthesizer rather than just getting a sample pack, because there's so many synthesis sample packs?
Of course, and there's nothing wrong at all with using sample packs, because there's just billions of them, and those are made generally by people that know what they're doing, and they'll be full of really good sounds. But I think it's kind of like anything. Why not just use presets? There's nothing wrong with that. I think putting your own drum sounds together is a bit like putting your own sounds together of any kind. In the process of making them, sometimes it generates an idea. The sound suggests a musical idea to you. Absolutely, so that's one good reason to do it. The other is that they're unique. I mean, obviously a lot of kick drums are kind of roughly the same, but they're your sounds, you've made them yourself, and very often things like drums, they become kind of signature sounds. What you don't always want to do every time you start building a new mix is reinvent the wheel. You just want to be able to say, I've got my drum sounds that I've put together that I'm really happy with. If they're yours and they're unique to you, then that's probably quite a good starting point for having that signature sound of your own. So that might be another good reason as well.
Cool. So shall we dive into Massive?
Yeah, let's do it. So we have a little basic channel strip here, which we'll look at. We've got Massive, which is obviously the synth, which is generating the sound. We've got a compressor here. These are all Native Instruments things. We've got this vintage compressor, which could be quite useful because we could use this to give us a little bit more punchiness or a little bit more attack in the sound. If we're interested in kind of designing sounds that have a little bit more punch, could be quite useful. On that kind of front, we've also got things like this, transient designers, very simple. All we're doing is controlling the attack time of a sound and the sustain time of a sound, but they can be very useful as well. And another big component of drum sounds generally is some kind of distortion. Not always, but often. The thing about drum sounds is they're noisy, as in rather than just being pitched sounds, they contain a lot of noise, that kind of percussive quality. Even though we're using electronic sounds, usually we're emulating, we have this kind of legacy of real world sounds, which are very noisy, things being hit, wooden things and metal things being, skins being hit and so on. So we might have some pitched element, but we have a lot of noisy quality as well. So things like this can be very useful for just putting in a little bit more character, maybe roughing the sound up a little bit as well. So maybe that's a typical channel strip that we might have, something like this that we would use when we were in a kind of little sound design mode, and we were just thinking about building a little library of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So let's have a look at Massive to start with. Let's say what I'm going to do actually is bypass all of these so that we start from scratch. And let's look at Massive. Let's say we go to a new sound, and that's the
sounds great.
That's finished. Yeah, job done. So that's the kind of Massive default sound. Obviously, it's just a sawtooth wave. Let's start with a kick drum. It's not difficult to get reasonably close to a semi-decent kick drum sound just by using a sine wave and using pitch modulation.
Yeah, that's the classic way.
That's the classic way, and what the pitch modulation will do is give you that kind of punchiness. And
yeah.
let's do that to start with. So what we want to do is load up a wavetable, which is sine to square, and I'm going to move the wavetable position all the way to the left, so it's now just a sine wave. And obviously, a drum sound is a relatively short sound with a quick decay. So in this patch, this default patch, we've got envelope 4, which is controlling the amp up here. So I'm just going to bring the decay all the way down. So we have something that becomes a short sound. The other thing that's generally quite a good idea at this point, you can hear that when I'm playing the keys, we've got clicks. Sometimes we have a click, sometimes we don't. The reason for that is the oscillators are in a kind of free running mode. Yeah. When we press the key, we don't know if we trigger the oscillator from the beginning of the cycle of the waveform or halfway through or the 90-degree point. So sometimes it clicks, sometimes it doesn't. So the thing about drum sounds is you want them to be consistent. So what we're going to do is go into the oscillator tab here and just turn on restart via gate. So what that means is every time we press a key in this position, it's starting from 0, so that's the center line. So we've got positive, yeah, negative, and we don't have that click. You might actually want the click, in which case you could start it from the 90-degree point, but the point is that you probably want to be consistent. What we're going to be doing today is making sounds and sampling them, and then putting them into battery. But there's nothing to stop you running your drums live out of a synth. If you do that, then it's really, really important that they're consistent, and so you would want to make sure that your oscillator phases were locked. If you were just sampling, it might not be so crucial, but it's generally quite a good idea. So we'll do that to start with, and we go back to our super simple sound. We want some pitch modulation. So what I'm going to do is use another envelope to control the pitch of oscillator 1 up here. So I'm just going to drag this up here, and usually you want quite a wide kind of range for this pitch modulation, so I'm just going to drag up. Obviously that doesn't sound much like a kick, but that's what
disco
actually
tom.
Yeah, disco tom, but that's actually what generally happens in a typical electronic kick drum sound, that kind of very wide pitch drop, but we want it to happen much more quickly than that. So let's go to the envelope, and firstly we want it to come all the way down to the bottom, but we also want it to happen much more quickly. And we'll take the attack time and bring that all the way off. So just from that, we already have at least some kind of punch aspect in the sound. So that's the single most important thing probably. If we don't have that, it becomes quite difficult to generate the sort of punchiness of the kick. If we've got it, then we're on the way. Maybe what we would often do is to kind of emphasize this, use another pitch envelope, because as you can see we've got 2 modulation slots here, and we just want an attack, a sort of impact in the sound. So we'll have another envelope which we'll drag over here, create another pitch range, but this second one will be even quicker. So this really is just for a little bit of just front on the sound. So without it, you can hear that's the basic character, but with that second shorter envelope. So we can choose how much front we want in this sound just by adjusting the range. And obviously you can go quite far into sort of like really obviously sort of techno kind of pure old school analog drum machine type stuff, which is great. Or you can kind of back it off a little, be a little bit more subtle, maybe make the envelope even shorter so it's less noticeable. Just becomes a nice little impact on the front. Maybe we could have a little less, a little more. You know, maybe you want a really bright punchy kick, there you go. So just that one simple thing, you can see that just adjusting those parameters, adjusting the decay times, adjusting the modulation depth of those two pitch envelopes, that's quite a broad range of stuff. Quite a broad range of sounds that we can get just out of those few parameters. There's loads more things that we can do to this to put in a little bit more character. For instance, at the moment we're only using a sine wave. So one thing that we could do is introduce some more harmonics into the sound. Let's say that instead of using a sine wave, I'm going to adjust the wavetable position here. So it's moving towards a square, so we introduce those higher harmonics. Maybe we just want to have those harmonics at the front of the sound, not in the tail end. So again, what we're going to do is use another envelope. And already we start to run out of envelopes, but that's fine because we can actually turn all of these LFOs into envelopes as well using the performer if we want. But let's use envelope 3. Drag that over here. I could possibly have used 1 or 2, but you know, whilst we have all the envelopes available, let's do something like this. So and that's, I mean, I think we're overdoing it a little bit here, just to kind of emphasize, probably back these off a little bit. And you'd be closer to something a little bit more typical. Okay, so that's another possibility here. Or you could use the intensity, because what the intensity does is it adjusts the amount of brightness in the sound. You could put envelopes on here. What we could also do to introduce a little bit more kind of texture is we could use some kind of distortion. So with or without using this square wave here, I'm just going to bypass that envelope for a minute. Really simple, kind of quick and dirty way to put kick drums together. Bit of pitch modulation, a bit of distortion, yeah. and there you go. So on this first effects here, we could load up one of these 3 different tubes, and we've got 3 to choose from. They all have slightly different tonal characteristics, but so that's without. Clean, punchy, nice, but you know, if we wanted something with a little bit more, and then you know, you start to get towards the kick drums, which are more like the kind of bassline kicks, so your 808s, your distorted 808s, and that kind of thing. So that's a possibility there. We've got other means of adding distortion inside Massive. We could go down here to the insert effects here, and these can be kind of a bit more extreme. Let's say that we went for something like a shaper. So again, we're using this, we're kind of overdoing it a little bit just to illustrate a point, but all of these things could be backed off. You don't necessarily have to try and make it sound really distorted, but you'll see if we take these 2 kinds of distortion off, we're back to 1975, which is fine as well. Let's say we unbypass that. You know, so that's quite a few different parameters that we can play around with to control the sound in some sort of way. So what else could we do? Let's say we wanted to add some external processing. We were looking for something a little bit more punchy. we could use a compressor for that. So what I'm going to do is turn on this this vintage compressor. So it's an emulation of an old field effect transistor, an old FET compressor. These are really good for drums because they've got a certain sort of sound that lends itself to drum sounds, but they've also got very fast attack and release characteristics, which make them really good for kind of making the sound punchy and so on. So slightly strangely about this, if you want a shorter attack time, it's kind of a little bit counterintuitive to start with, but if you want a shorter attack time, you turn the attack up. So we don't want to be all the way there. We're looking to have a bit more punchiness in the sound. If we turn the attack time up really high, we lose the punchiness because the compressor just squashes the sound immediately. So we want a bit more punchiness, so we need to back the attack off a little bit. And then obviously we've got our compression ratio, our amount, and if we want to drive it, we just increase the input. And let's say we bounce this down. We could bounce it with and without compression. Have a look at the waveform, do a little comparison, and you can see what that's actually doing to the sound. So, I mean, we'll hear it anyway. This is without, and this is with. And let's say that we wanted a little bit more, or an alternative means of putting some kind of punchiness in the sound. We go to a transient designer and turn that on. And that really starts to kind of make it kind of punchy. So if we wanted something that really cut through a mix, then that would be it. But as you can see down here, we're peaking the channel out, which is really bad. So let's just turn on a limiter. We're not limiting it heavily. We're just kind of capping it off just below 0. So we don't introduce any clipping into the sound there. And then we've got one more option if we wanted it, if we wanted to go down that route and we were looking for something a little bit more kind of grainy and dirty. Let's say we turn on the driver here, and let's.
It's a serious hard style kick.
Yeah, I mean this is really kind of distorted now, isn't it? I mean,
yeah. That's an effect in itself.
Yeah. So you can come up with some quite obviously really filthy things doing that. So I would say all of these things can contribute to the sound to come up with your own kind of signature kick. If we go back to Massive, there's other things that we could do as well. We're only using a single oscillator at the moment. So another thing we could do, let's say we bypassed all of these, is introduce another wavetable to give us another kind of character or edge in the sound. So let's say that we turn on oscillator 2. Oscillator 2 at the moment now is producing a sawtooth wave. But what we want to do is just have that sawtooth wave right at the front of the sound again. We want to be able to control this. And the problem is we've kind of run out of envelopes here, because as you can see, 3 and 4, and they're all in use. And we could probably, because they're all quite short envelopes, double these up and use one envelope to control the wavetable and that route. We just want to think, we want to keep it all flexible. So what we could do is take LFO5, or any of the LFOs, turn it into a performer like this. And the performer is kind of somewhere in between an LFO and an envelope, isn't it? What we want to do is just use one kind of segment of this performer envelope. So I'm going to load a curve like this, and we're looking for a flat line, which I'm going to put in the beginning and on every other division. And this is now going to be an envelope that we're going to apply to, let's say, the amplitude of our second oscillator. So we'll leave it as a sawtooth for the time being, because we can hear it, it's really obvious. Let's say, let's bring the amp down. but take the performer, drag it here, give it its full range, and let's make this happen more quickly. Oh, and the other thing you can hear at the moment is it's actually playing a combination of both of these patterns, which is why we can hear that kind of jittering sound, which we don't want. So let's push this all the way up. It's now just this envelope. And
that's how good that kick was.
That's amazing. Yeah. We probably don't want it to be
Turn the
so...
speakers down in here.
We don't want it to be so loud, so in the signal, let's bring that down like this.
Yeah,
and again, it's just that, all of these things, if we're subtle with them, they just add in like 5% or 10% of the characteristic. Maybe we would like this to be more of a kind of exponential curve. I'm going to go here and do something like that. And we could speed it up, we could slow it down, etc. Okay, so that's another option. And that was only a sawtooth wave. So obviously, what we could do at this point is go through the wavetables.
Yeah.
Find something that we like, which is just like a little
Sounded
front
pretty massive,
in the sound.
yeah, if you excuse the pun.
Yeah.
It wasn't even intentional.
All right, so let's imagine then that we wanted to bounce it down and put it inside battery. Like I said, you could keep this running live in your project, and the advantage of that would be that you can modulate or automate all of these parameters. So you have your basic sound, whatever it is, and you just get to some sort of little 8-bar section where you want the drums to become ridiculously huge, or you adjust the decay envelope so that instead of being a short kick, it just kind of rings out or something. Yeah. You could do all of that if you were running it live, but obviously there's a little bit more processing going on inside your DAW to do that, and maybe it would be good to build up a little library of sounds. You load up Massive and you just say, well, I've got 200 kick drums that I've made and they're all mine, let's just scroll through them. Yep, that's the one for this, and there you go. So the process of bouncing this down, let's say we just give ourselves a little trigger. And that's probably a little high pitched, so let's just knock that down an octave. And yeah, maybe if we try a quick bounce with and without these things, you'll see the kind of difference that it can make to the sound. So let's just say we bounce that in place, and we'll call it, just for the purpose of what we're doing, kick 1. Not a very imaginative name, is it? But it will do. And that's our waveform. So we can see we've built quite a lot of characteristics into this. We can see that the punchiness of the sound is this shorter, quicker part of the waveform that's come from the pitch envelopes, and all of this sort of slight kind of rough jaggedness. This is all the various different distortion elements that we've built in, and there it is. And we can compare this to, let's just say that we did this with, let's mute that and go back to our compressor. Okay, and we'll limit it as well so that we don't peak the channel out, and let's just bounce that in place again and call it kick 1 version 2. And if we have a look at that, then yeah, we'll see that we get a slight different, okay, well, very different, because we've kind of overdone this a bit, but you can see that what we have now, this is the attack that the compressor has given to us, so we emphasize the punchiness in the drums. So spending a bit of time being quite careful about this, really designing the sound, really coming up with the things that you like, carefully editing them and making your library. This is like coming back to the original question, why would we bother? we could probably find something more interesting to be doing. But actually, this is kind of quite interesting, quite good fun, and it does have the advantage that we've got our own sounds. Let's just quickly edit this up. So there's our first version. That's completely the wrong key command. So there's the first one, and the second one here. So let's look at how we would load those into battery. Really, really important that we edit these things absolutely perfectly on the beginning of the sound, because even a tiny little gap of, you know, a couple of samples or a few samples is going to really affect the phase relationship of these sounds to any other sounds that we use, because inevitably we'll start layering up drums, won't we, when we start to do programming and put a mix together. So and also we don't want things to be flamming, so that we trigger a MIDI note and then there's this short gap before we hear the sound. That would be very bad. So they are the first two sounds of our brand new kick drum library. If we wanted to put those into massive, no. If we wanted to put those into battery, really, really simple. I mean, battery is very easy, quite intuitive instrument to use. Yeah. So here's the grid. Here's the default empty instrument, and what we have here is a number of cells which don't contain any samples at all. If we want to put things in there, it's just a question of drag and drop. And you can change the grid size. Let's say that you were working with an Ableton Push or a machine or something, and you wanted to adjust the grid size so that if you were performing, it was kind of a visual representation of what you were actually doing on the control surface. You could do that. You could go here, cell matrix, and change the size and so on. So very simple, very intuitive to use. But okay, let's say that we're building our own library and we're looking for something which is a little bigger. We could be greedy and go for 16 by 8, a much bigger grid. I mean, that's quite a lot. But let's say we drag both of those in, drop them in there. And there's the first sound, there's the second. It's quite interesting when you see the difference that distortion's made to the waveform. You see how it's kind of more triangular. Yeah. That means it's the more rounded waveform has got less of those high harmonics. That's the effect of the distortion added in there. And then the fact that we've got it inside battery means we call it up instantly, and we can start to take advantage of yet more filters, yet more effects, and so on. So I'd say it's worth doing. You know, there are those days where you're just not really hearing something, a little melody or a bass line or something. You're not quite in the mood for programming a bit of music, so you just work on your sound library, and yeah, exactly. The next time you feel really inspired, it's kind of,
sounds
great.
Are all ready to go.
Yeah, I'm so glad I made those. I've got 200 drum sounds. And
that was a good day.
Yeah, that was worth doing.
Nice one. So, shall we jump to questions? 15th sign, regular FFL viewer. Thanks for watching. If your bass line changes key, and I was kind of going to ask this myself, if your bass line changes key or changes notes in your song, example A, E, D, should the kick tuning follow, or should you have it in the root key of the song?
Neither one is right or wrong.
Right, next
That's
question.
not very helpful. But what I would say is, if you think about listening to an acoustic drum kit, obviously the drums are tuned and they're tuned carefully, but every time the drummer hits the pedal, you've got the same. Actually, depending on how hard he hits the pedal, the note will change. It will be a slightly higher pitch probably if he hits it hard, or she hits it hard. Yeah, but we're used to hearing music all the time where the kick drum doesn't change pitch to follow the bass line, so it doesn't need to. But having said that, why not? It's a great idea. You know, you can try things like that and come up with some quite interesting, unusual ideas. But typically, I would say it doesn't have to. It's not going to be a disaster. The thing about drums is They have pitched elements, but they are also noisy. They're supposed to be like a burst of sound, a burst of noise. That's the main role, the main function of the drums, is to sort of like accentuate those percussive points, and they do that through noise, really.
Yeah, exactly. So we probably have time for one more question here. Kartik Saluja is asking, I mean, in this instance, we were showing how to give sounds an attack and give the pitch and attack sound. What if you wanted the drums to retreat from the transient? Would that just be the opposite modulation? I mean, the question is, how do you make drums move backwards in the mix rather than forwards?
Sure. Well, you could sample them and then reverse them. That would. I mean, or you could play around with the envelope shapes so that you have an attack, so an opening envelope, and then closing really quickly. That would be a way to do it. But obviously, the great thing about sampling these things is once you start getting tricky with the audio editing, you always have the option of the forwards version, the backwards version. You line them up, and if you want this kick drum to finish perfectly on the end of bar 4, so it goes into bar 5, and there's the next hit.
Yeah.
You can do that so much more easily with audio than you can with running it live inside the project.
Yeah, exactly. Nice one. So unfortunately, we are out of time for today's FFL. Hopefully you got plenty of inspiration, but if you're keen to learn a lot more about sound design, native instruments, plugins, and a lot more good stuff like that, you can learn directly from Chris on our online courses. Head to pointblanklondon.com for more on those, and we'll see you next Friday for another FFL. Cheers.